Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer and welcome to another Sociology of Media Voices series. Today we're going to talk about something that is quite important, but sometimes a little bit misunderstood, and that is psychological safety. What is psychological safety in terms of being in an organization, being on a board, being on an advisory space at your work? We tend to focus on psychological safety, thinking it's something in our homes, in something we do in our interpersonal relationships within the confines of our own personal spaces. But we're going to hear from somebody who's really opened up our thinking, and it's Dr. Peter Brace. So welcome, Dr. Peter Brace.
Thank you, Ricky. Lovely to be here talking to you.
Thank you. So before we deep dive into it, I just want to read a little bit about Dr. Peter Brace's work so we all get a bit of a perspective of where he's coming from. So Dr. Brace is an adjunct faculty member at Swinburne University of Technology, Melbourne. He teaches graduate and postgraduate courses in philosophy, philosophy of science, and critical thinking. He is psychological safety consultant for APAC and a CEO and co-founder of Human Capital Realisation Australia. He has a broad and deep experience in customer relationship management, international consulting, and project management. He has worked in a wide range of industries and organisations, helping some of Australia's largest companies with their strategic direction for customer service, as well as working across the Asia-Pacific region for prominent multinational organizations. His background assures clients of innovative and effective solutions to their most pressing and complex business problems. Wow, that is incredible. So let's take us on a journey, Dr. Peter Brace. How did you get started? What is the Dr. Peter Brace story?
Well, I worked in technology for a long time, Ricky, and focused most recently on human resource systems and processes. During that time, I went to uni for the first time as a mature age student because I was interested in psychology and had been since being a teenager. So I completed a psych degree at Swinburne, but I kind of got sidetracked by philosophy and ended up doing a PhD in complex systems, particularly as they relate to ecology and how the way we feel about the natural world shapes what we do. So that kind of fitted in neatly with the work I've done in change in organizations. And then probably 2 or 3 years ago, I heard this term psychological safety, and I had no idea really what it was. And I heard the presentation someone gave on it, and immediately I understood it. And I think, like most people, when we hear what this is, we feel that we understand it because we've experienced it, and usually in a bad way. So we've worked in a place where we didn't feel accepted, or we didn't feel like we belonged. We didn't feel like we could really bring our unique strengths to that job, which is what psychological safety is all about. So I thought, I've got to get more involved with this, understand it more. So I dedicated last 2 or 3 years to really doing a deep dive, the phrase that you use, into psychological safety, and just found that there's so many benefits, not only in how we feel in working in a team, but actually the work that we do and the quality of the work that we do. And the research is fascinating in this area. So how's that does that give you a bit of the intro?
Yeah, that really does frame it for us. And I think for listeners really kind of maybe hearing it for the first time in this context, will sit quite comfortable. It's almost like there's a light bulb that goes in, because for many of us, well, for me, like in my mid-50s, I grew up with the concept of psychological safety as being fundamental to the self, but it was always something that occurred in private space. It was something that was it happened in your home, it happened in your own formation earlier on, and then that sort of was sat there, and then everything else was just sort of built on it. But I feel as though that we're going to deep dive into this, and we're going to see how it actually does impact our daily lives now, and how we can use those ideas into our consciousness thinking to really help shape and frame our well-being. So as we begin our journey, so let's first define what is psychological safety in the context of organizations.
So the term was coined in the 60s by Geo Schein and Bennis, who were academics and management consultants, and they defined it as a climate where you can take risks in a group. So the risks are really interpersonal risks, right? So those risks of being rejected or looked down on or ridiculed, and so they said this is a climate, a team climate, an atmosphere, if you like, where you feel, look, I can say what I'm feeling, I can say what I think about this issue that we're facing, and I'm not going to be looked down on. I'm not going to be laughed at. I'm not going to be ignored. I'm going to be valued, respected, and listened to. So that's psychological safety. It's something that comes out of the team. And in the early part of this century, Amy Edmondson, who's at Harvard, did extensive research into this, and her and lots of others have looked at the extreme value of psychological safety in making teams productive, efficient, innovative, and all those good things that you want when people are working together.
And that really sort of kind of gives us that thinking there for a minute. And you mentioned risk. How important is risk when we talk about psychological safety?
Yeah, it's interesting when you consider the research that's been done on the types of task that make people most stressed. And there's some interesting research been done on this, where groups of people were given tasks, stressful tasks under time pressure, with a high cognitive load, difficult tasks to do. And during the work they were doing, the level of cortisol in their blood was measured. So cortisol, as you probably know, is called the stress hormone. It's not exactly the stress hormone, but when we're aroused, such as in a state of stress, we produce more cortisol. So basically, they're looking at what tasks are the most stressful. And they found the tasks that were most stressful had something in common. And it was a task where you felt that you were being judged by others, right? Where you felt there's a social evaluation going on of what you're doing. And those tasks were like 5 times more stressful than any other kind of task. As humans, we really belong in social groups. And if we feel that our acceptance and our membership of those groups is under threat in some way, our stress level rises. We do our best to fit in. We all know that feeling, right? And when we're stressed, it's not only bad for our body and our health, but it's really bad for the work we do, because we're focusing on getting rid of that stress rather than working together with people to produce something, which is what a team does. So I'm not sure. I think I've rambled a bit there, Ricky, but did I answer that question?
And that kind of follows on to the next question, which is, how do we handle and address instances when someone feels unsupported, or as you mentioned, stressed, psychologically unsafe within that particular organization?
Yeah, well, great question. And we focus a lot on two levels, I guess. We focus on the organization as a whole, and we focus on the individual in the organization and how they're doing, right? But I think we're missing a level there, because the way things get done in organizations is through teams. So what we really need to focus on is the team, and how the team is going, and how people in the team are feeling. And, you know, teams exist at all levels of the organization, from the factory floor to the CEO's office. Everybody's working in a team. You can't get something done in an organization on your own. You've got to work with other people to get it done. And the leader of the team is the person who has the greatest influence on the level of psychological safety of the team. More than half of the level of psychological safety, whether it's good or bad, is attributed to that leader. And I think we all know that, right, from our experience. So you really need to start working with the leader of the team and make them aware of what they're doing and what they can do to improve the level of psychological safety in that group. And you can do that by measuring the level of psychological safety in the team or across the whole organization, but focus on the team and the leaders and how they're doing.
And that leads us to almost started to get to that deep dive, is how do we measure and assess the level of psychological safety within an organizational space?
Yeah, psychological safety is interesting, because it's an emergent quality of the team. So it's not something you can engineer into that team. It's not something you can plug into that team, and not something you can command the team to have. You have to work on the conditions that produce psychological safety and help it to emerge. But having said that, you know, it's a bit like the weather, right? The weather is hard to predict. It's impossible to control, but you can measure it. There's lots of different ways to do it. So you measure psychological safety in a team very simply. You ask people how they feel. So you ask them, how do you feel about taking a risk in your team? You ask them, do you feel that, you know, the people you work with have got your back? Do you feel that you could raise a difficult problem to your boss or your team leader? So you're not asking about what they're doing. You're asking how they're feeling. And that's how you measure psychological safety. And there's a lot of scales. You know, Amy Edmondson, who I mentioned, has a 7-question questionnaire. It's in the public domain. Anyone could use it. There are proprietary measures that go into more detail about the level of psychological safety and the reasons for it. But basically, if people feel safe to respond to a questionnaire and they believe that it's anonymous, you can get a pretty good result from just asking people.
And how do we recognize and reward behaviors that contribute to psychological safety and a positive work environment?
Well, if you're the team leader and you see someone in your team, let me step back a sec. We've probably heard the term microaggressions, and many of us have experienced that, right? So it's a word even, or a glance, or a failure to make eye contact that somehow transmits a lack of acceptance. If you turn that on its head, and a wonderful term, I can't take credit for this, and I'm not sure who came up with it, but the term micro-validation. So within that team, just a word or two or a glance that shows that you value someone because of their difference is extremely powerful in helping to make that person feel accepted and valued and have some status in that team, which all contributes to psychological safety. So just to say, you know, I really appreciate that comment that you made. You know, I know you have your unique perspective on this. It was so good that you shared that with us. Thank you. You know, how long did that take? Like 10, 15 seconds to show I noticed what you did or what you said. I noticed that came from a place of difference, and I value it. That's a wonderful way to start to help everybody feel accepted and part of the team. And when a leader models something, generally the rest of us follow, right? If they're the leader of a team or a group that we're in, we notice that and we start to sort of imitate it ourselves. It's something we naturally do. So just as when a leader does something bad, the team tends to follow that. If the leader's practicing these ways to show acceptance, ways to show that people are valued, we tend to follow that.
And as I was thinking that, I guess sometimes some people may say, but what about the dynamics of power in the space? And how do we kind of position power when it comes to psychological safety?
Yeah, power is a bit of a killer of psychological safety, Ricky. One of the thought leaders in this area, Dr. Timothy Clark, he talks about psychological safety as making a place where vulnerability is rewarded. And power and vulnerability are actually opposite ends of the spectrum. So one of the things that leaders need to learn is really the power of vulnerability, of showing themselves to be vulnerable, saying they don't know something, saying they don't have the answer to everything, asking for the opinion of their team and showing that they really need it. We can't command and control in the modern workplace because the work is too complex. We need to rely on the people in the team to really bring their whole ability to work, their unique strengths, rather than try and command and control everything they do. We need to open ourselves up to be vulnerable and rely on our team members.
And I just thought from that, and it sort of maybe you sort of answered it, but maybe again for our listeners, what mechanisms can we put in place to support and encourage open dialogue? And the catchword here, disagreement and dissident among board members and employees of an organization. And when I include employees, I'm also including people who are volunteers or contract workers into that stakeholder group.
Yeah. So coming back to power again, there's kind of a hierarchy of power in any organization, and there's a difference in status and power between those at the top and those who are further down. And what we want to try and do is reduce that power distance as much as we can. So, if people don't feel safe to raise a dissident voice, we need to try and show that is safe. So one way you can do that in a team or a group is for the leader to actually assign someone to be the dissident, assign them to be the person who disagrees. So, in a regular meeting, you can say, okay, Ricky, your turn this week, you're going to be the one who finds everything wrong with the ideas that we're putting forward. So this is your job. We want you to take care of that today in this meeting. Next week, it'll be someone else. So we're not singling you out. We just want to see what it's like when people can freely raise problems and issues. And so, that's making it non-threatening. That's making it, safer for people to raise their voice and say, this is not right, or I don't agree with this. And as you model that and as you encourage that, the culture of that team will gradually change so it becomes more acceptable to raise issues and problems. Because, there's no point in having diversity in your team if those diverse members don't feel free to offer their opinion and their perspective. You really need the power of diversity to be activated by the feeling of inclusion.
And on the idea of diversity, and in your work, is there any difference between gender when it comes to psychological safety?
So do some genders feel more psychologically safe than others? I honestly don't know, Ricky. I don't know if there's been research done into that, but I would suggest that it probably depends very much on the team itself. There's such a variation between teams, and the level of psychological safety they feel is probably going to be far greater than the difference in gender, the way people feel. That's what I would suggest.
Mm. And do you also, I mean, I remember years ago reading things that groups, like group formation, and we're looking at for what brings us together. I remember the years ago there was a theory that, we all think alike, we look alike, but as we move into different kind of, globalization, and also the inclusion of more people with different disabilities and abilities, and a more openness about those of invisible disabilities, mental health. Does that impact an organization when you have a really diverse group of people coming together in terms of psychological safety?
Well, it's a tremendous opportunity because the more diversity you've got, the greater opportunity there is for innovation. Now I think of those who may be, neurodivergent, right? They're presenting a very different point of view on things. Those who are have mobility issues, for example, or those who have problems with vision or hearing. Folks like that have to be innovative every single day of their life just to live in the world that the rest of us take for granted. So innovation is really a way of life to them. But if they don't feel safe as part of that team or group to express their views, that wonderful resource that is available there is not being brought into the team. So diversity is great, but diversity you can engineer into your team. You can change your hiring practices. You can increase that percentage, right? But that's of very little value unless there's inclusion as well. And inclusion is a feeling, which is a lot more difficult to create. And that's where psychological safety comes in, by addressing the conditions that cause people to feel safe or unsafe, then you get the real value of diversity.
And now that we've given a kind of real sort of deep dive into psychological safety, what training or resources are available to people listening, to board members, employees, any stakeholders who really want to explore this further and deepen their understanding of how they can embed psychological safety within their spaces?
Yeah, I think there's really that can be addressed on three levels. So if you have an organization that is interested in psychological safety and understands the value of it, and there is more than 50 years of research showing its value in all types of organizations, then the first thing you need to do is to tell everybody what this is. Okay, to tell everyone in the organization, this is what psychological safety is, this is why it's important, this is why we're looking at it, this is what we're going to do. So be open and transparent and let everybody know. The second thing you can do, I think, to be effective about this, you need to focus on those people who lead teams. So start to work with those leaders of teams and get into more detail as to how do you create those conditions for psychological safety? How do you help people feel accepted and heard in a meeting? How do you help everyone to feel that they have status and importance in that group? And all those other factors that help create the conditions for psychological safety to emerge. So, I've got some online training that helps leaders to see those issues, but also brings them together in a cohort to discuss what they're learning and how it's going in the organization. And then the third level is to work with those folks who are having difficulties with this. All right. So maybe it's the leader who has practiced the command and control method for all of their career, and now they're being asked to be vulnerable. And that can be challenging, right? That can be scary for leaders who really relied on power. So work with them individually, coaching, mentoring, whatever they need to help them learn this, because learning in itself is a risky and sometimes difficult process for us. So those three levels: the whole organization, the team leaders, and then those, what should we call them, the recalcitrant leaders who need a bit of extra help and support.
And Peter, if people are listening right now and they would like to explore these issues further, perhaps with yourself, or get in touch with you, what is your, we'll put the link, but what is your best way of contacting you?
Look, I use LinkedIn a lot. It took me a long time to realize how important LinkedIn is for connecting with people, but now I'm fully committed to LinkedIn. So reach out to me there. Peter Brace HCR is the where you can find me, or just do a search for my name. There's not many Peter Braces on LinkedIn, but find me there. I'm based in Melbourne, but I work across the region. So I always love to connect with people and have a chat about psychological safety. It's one of my favorite topics. I believe it's so important. And I think you agree with that, Ricky.
Oh, wholeheartedly. And I've been very careful today not to put my own bias, but it is something that has shaped my life and recently reaffirmed my sense of self and my resilience. Dr. Peter Brace, it's been wonderful speaking with you and deep diving on all about psychological safety and how we can embed that practice to really address risk and make risk our friend. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ricky. Lovely to talk to you. Appreciate it very much.